Maggie, I'm so glad that you're here. You almost need no introduction when I talk to you about all the things I'm interested in. So I'm really glad you're here right now. You know Trump better than most. You've written this fascinating book as well that details so much of the political psychology of him as well. I'm wondering, even if a small number of the prior cases get introduced or admitted in any way here, and there's the past legal run-ins, how do you think Trump's going to handle that being addressed?
It's an excellent question, and thank you for having me. I think that he will not decide whether he is going to testify until he knows whether those cases are going to be allowed by the judge. I think that the Sandoval hearing will be pretty revealing in terms of what he will be able to say on the stand and what he won't. We've already seen in these past cases, at least one of them in the E. Jean Carroll case, a deposition he gave in the New York Attorney General case was used in that case. And so we know that his past words and things he has said and things that he has been accused of or found liable for can be very damaging to him in other cases. I don't think that he is as likely to testify if all of these things are allowed to be asked about. If he does and he decides to go ahead with it, I think that he will say, this is unfair, this is untrue. He will continue to deny the allegations in the E. Jean Carroll case as he has. He will continue to say that the finding in the New York Attorney General case is a witch hunt and unfair. I think you will hear very similar things to what we've heard before.
As a prosecutor, almost on the one hand, wanting to see if you can poke the bear and get him to not toe the attorney's party line. On the other hand, it will become rabbit hole after rabbit hole if he is allowed to testify on all these matters. You can't really constrain him in the same way, but in the court of public opinion, so to speak, even for these jurors who will have to know just what's in front of them, they might know a great deal of this already, and he might be enticed into trying to change their mind.
There's no question that Donald Trump sees himself as his best salesman, and we saw that in the E. Jean Carroll case, the second one, where there was a jury, and that he was present for. And he was clearly trying to make eye contact, he was trying to smile at people. He believes he is his own best salesman and that he thinks that some of these folks are his supporters. Now, what we saw in the E. Jean Carroll case is it took that jury exactly a few hours to render a judgment of $83 million against him. So, I don't think his sales abilities work so well there. I do think you're going to see him try to do something similar. To your point about he could go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, I'm confident his lawyers have told him that, but at the end of the day, he is ultimately the person who is on trial. And as you know, a lot of defendants, not just him, want to defend themselves, and they want to argue in their favor. And I think that his lawyers are going to be hard pressed to stop him if he really decides that's what he's interested in.
And they want their body language to speak for them, right? They don't want to be this stoic figure because people might attribute that to guilt or innocence. You never really know. And so he'll want to try to use his body and his weight to try to expression-wise say things. But also the idea of being a salesman. I'm really intrigued on this because we know a little bit about the 7 that have already been seated. They've got to have a total of 18, obviously. Some are married, some single, a native New Yorker, lots of New York Times readers. One person says that she was unaware of Trump's other cases. I'm going to call that one the Rip Van Winkle of the actual crew. So how is Trump going to look at them as potential customers of his sales?
So there were a couple of jurors who were excused. Let's say there was one juror, a man, who was a civilian photographer for a law enforcement agency. He knew some of the so-called Central Park Five, the men who were ultimately exonerated after having their confessions coerced, who Trump took out a full-page ad saying that they should face the death penalty after they were arrested. He said that he had been an alternate in a civil trial involving Trump and Merv Griffin. I mean, he was fascinating. He was someone I think that the Trump legal team would have really liked. He's not on the jury. Of the people who are on the jury, look, the news reading habits of a lot of these jurors definitely is something that the defense team is aware of. A lot of them are New York Times readers. A lot of them are CNN readers. They would rather have people who are, Fox News watchers or New York Post readers, and there were a few of those. They have been trying to look specifically for younger black men and civil servants, whether we're talking about police officers, sanitation workers, firefighters, people who they think are, white working class who might be part of Trump's political base. That's not represented on this jury so far. But there have been people who have said, they think that it's fine that he speaks his mind, or that they don't really have an opinion of him. There was one gentleman who said he was, I think, something like intrigued by Trump. He voiced some sort of curiosity. As you know, defense lawyers, as much as they try to figure out the best options for them with a jury, they kind of get what they get. I think they see some options here for what they're hoping for, which is a hung jury.
Why in the world do you think Trump is fixated not on the criminal trial in his at least post, but Jimmy Kimmel and his Oscar performance? I mean, just this morning he was tweeting about this very thing, calling him the worst host ever of the once vaunted Academy Awards. He's in the middle of a criminal trial, Maggie. Why would this be his focus?
For the same reason that he was focused on reports about his crowd size on Inauguration Day in 2017, or the same reason that, he will focus on any number of criticisms from, folks who were civilians while he was president. In this case, I think it's because Jimmy Kimmel has spent a lot of time mocking the beginning of the trial, including the reports that Trump was apparently sleeping. And I think this is just him lashing out about it.
I have to ask you too quickly about the idea of his campaign now asking Republican candidates if they want to use his name or likeness, they got to pay.
I don't remember seeing anything like that before. I mean, it's literally essentially a tax for candidates who want to fund. Usually it's a ticket, and the top of the ticket is supposed to help the people who are below, and essentially Trump is looking at it as it all comes up. This is obviously a pretty Trumpian business model, but I don't remember seeing it politicized in a campaign this way before.
Nor do I. Listen, Maggie, stick around, please. I have a lot of questions at home, I'm sure you all do, about this trial, and Maggie's going to help answer some of them right now. If you, of course, want to participate, just go to CNN.com/Trump trial questions, fill out the form, type in your question there, then we'll reach out to have you call in as the trial unfolds. Let's go to our first caller tonight. We've got Boom from Toronto. Hey, Boom, what's your question?
Hey, well, the delay tactics of the Trump legal team have failed to prevent the hush money trial from beginning before the 2024 election. Do you think now that Trump wants a quick trial, or will he attempt to harp on every detail, which would have the consequence of keeping mostly unflattering topics discussed every day until the trial is over?
That's a great question. I think ultimately he didn't want this to happen at all as a trial. And now that it's here, I think it'd probably be prudent politically to have the trial concluded before it drags on all the way up into the election and having potentially salacious details come out. But again, Maggie, I want to hear your take on this point because the delay tactics did not work here. Does he want this to go quickly now or draw out?
No, he wants to draw it out. He was very explicit about that this week in court, talking to reporters in the hallway outside the courtroom. He was criticizing Justice Merchan for moving too fast. I mean, this is an extremely quick jury selection process so far. It's very striking. But his folks want to delay for two reasons. They want to delay in terms of the election. They want to try to get this, as close to the election as possible because they think that that is politically more helpful to him. And they also want to try to have as many issues they can raise on appeal as possible. And so, now an appeal would mean that they think that they have a likelihood of losing. But those are the options they're trying to preserve.
Let's go to Colleen from Ludington, Michigan. What's your question?
Yeah, Laura. I was curious on why are they allowing Mr. Trump to speak before the trial and after the trial every day at the courthouse?
That's a great question. First, Maggie, who is the they? Because is the they Trump allowing himself? Are his lawyers able to control him and not have him talk?
No. I mean, for the same reason that, his lawyers often struggle to get him to follow their suggestions or warnings, and we've seen that repeatedly. He considers himself his own best spokesman and lawyer, and he wants to talk and he wants to defend himself, and he wants a lot of media around this case, and he has said that explicitly to aides and advisors and allies. So if the they is his campaign, that's why. In terms of the media, there's a great public interest in this trial, and the media is going to ask questions of the person who is the presumptive Republican nominee for president.
He's got to dance on the pin or the head of a needle, though, when you think about trying to abide by the gag order, wherever the judge ultimately will order. I would suspect there'll be more opportunities for the judge to say, listen, here's what you can and cannot do going forward. Whether he'll abide by that, anyone's guess. Greg from Hartford, where I was actually born. Hartford, Connecticut. What's your question, Greg?
How do you respond to the assertion from Trump and his supporters that Trump's actions were harmless and charges were only brought against Trump because he is a political opponent?
Well, gosh, I hear this a lot, that he's only being targeted for that reason. But this is not a law that was created just for Donald Trump. It's been on the books. It's been prosecuted before. There are other issues surrounding it. So I think it really is a tactic politically to try to undermine the credibility of the DA's office and what's being done here. But at the end of the day, the jurors are going to have to figure out whether the prosecution has met their burden of proving that this was somehow actually criminal conduct that they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. They can't rely just on one's gut. They have to prove it in this instance. And so he will continue to make this argument about him against the world as a proxy for every American voter, but the prosecution has got to make sure they can meet their case. Heather from Sevierville, Tennessee, what's your question?
Hi, I was just wondering, will the pool reporters allowed in the room be rotated throughout the trial? And also, how did Maggie Haberman end up in there on day one?
I'll let you answer that. How do you get everywhere you need to be all the time?
So two answers there. There's only pool reporters in the courtroom right now because there's jury selection going on. When there's not jury selection going on, there's going to be upward of 60 reporters in the courtroom every day. The rest of us for now are in the overflow room, and many of us will be there throughout the trial. I will be too. I happen to be in the pool rotation on Monday afternoon. It was just my slot. My colleague Jonah Bromwich had done the morning pool rotation. The New York Times was part of the pool that day. I'll be part of the pool again tomorrow.
When Trump saw you, what was the reaction? I'm always curious.
He stared at me for a few seconds, and then he left the courtroom.
A good stare? What kind of stare?
I don't feel I'm capable of assessing the stare. He didn't look happy. Let's put it that way.
I'll come with you next time. I'll assess that stare. Thank you so much, Maggie. Thank you for helping to answer these questions.